The prison of the overseers was a place built to break the will of any living being. It was not only a cage, but also a reminder that freedom had been stolen from those who once walked proudly under their own sky. The walls were made of black steel that hummed with hidden energy. The air carried a sharp smell of metal, and every sound seemed to echo in endless circles. Inside one of the many dark halls sat a group of human captives. They had been taken from their home worlds after losing battles against the overseer fleets. These humans were not soldiers anymore. They were laborers, trapped and forced to obey the commands of machines and guards. Among them was Tom, a young man who had learned to keep his eyes open and his ears sharp. He looked around with a quiet fire burning inside his chest. Tom was not the strongest of the captives, but he had something many of the others had lost. He had hope. Each day he studied the routines of the guards who walked with heavy steps across the metal floors. He counted the seconds between the flashing lights on the energy shields. He noticed the small flickers that appeared when the power line shook during storms outside the station. These little details were hidden from most eyes, but Tom stored them in his memory. Close to him sat Mira, a woman with calm eyes that carried both pain and strength. She had been here longer than Tom, yet she had not given in to despair. She whispered to Tom when the drones floated away. She asked about his ideas, his thoughts, and the patterns he had seen. At first, she had only listened, not sure if the young man's dreams could be trusted. But with each passing day she saw that his mind was sharp and his spirit was unbroken. The overseers did not speak much to their captives. They used machines to deliver orders. A hollow voice would echo through the halls telling them to rise, to march, to work, and to sleep. The humans moved like shadows, too tired to resist. Yet deep inside, each one carried a memory of freedom. It lived in their silence, in the way they looked at the stars through narrow windows when no guard was near. Tom often stared at those stars. He told himself that one day he would breathe fresh air again, not the recycled wind of this station. He told himself that one day he would feel the warmth of sunlight on his skin. The stars gave him courage, and that courage spread slowly to Mira and then to others. A single spark was beginning to grow, even in this place of steel. One evening, when the captives were sent back to their cells, Tom leaned closer to Mira. His voice was barely a breath. He told her that the shield which locked their hall had a weak spot. He had seen it flicker whenever the main power grid was overloaded. Mira's eyes widened. She asked if he was certain, and Tom nodded firmly. It was the first step, but it was a step they needed. Mira did not waste time. Later that night, when the guards had walked past, she moved quietly from one cell to another. She whispered to the others, sharing Tom's discovery. Some shook their heads, too afraid to believe. Others lowered their voices and asked for more details. Hope was a dangerous thing in the prison. If it failed, it could break a heart beyond repair. But Mira knew they needed it, or they would wither away until nothing was left of them. Tom felt the pressure of many eyes on him in the following days. People looked at him not as just another captive, but as someone who might hold the key to freedom. He did not enjoy the attention, yet he accepted it. He told himself that he would rather risk everything for a chance at escape than spend his life wall. King in chains. Life in the prison did not change. The guards still walked their rounds. The drones still scanned the halls with red beams of light. The orders still came in the same hollow voice. Yet under the surface, something was different. A quiet current of energy was moving through the humans. They began to hide broken wires and sharpen tools in corners where the cameras did not reach. They began to share small pieces of food, storing them for a day when they might need strength. Tom watched all of this and felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. He was not a leader by choice, but the eyes of the captives had chosen him. Mira often stayed by his side, calming him when doubt crept into his mind. She reminded him that every great change began with a single step. The prison was built to keep them in chains forever, but humans had always found ways to rise when all seemed lost. Tom knew that the overseers had power, machines, and weapons, but they did not understand the human spirit. He whispered to Mira that when the time came, they would not only escape, but also show the overseers what it meant to fight for freedom. And so the first part of their story began in silence, in whispers, and in stolen moments under the unblinking eyes of their captors. It was only a seed, but a seed could grow even in the coldest steel. The prison of the overseers never slept. Machines hummed at all hours. Lights flickered in steady rhythms, and guards moved in endless patrols to most captives. Every day was the same as the last, but after Tom's discovery of the shields, weakness, a new feeling had begun to spread. It was not loud and open. It was quiet and hidden, like fire glowing under ashes. Tom and Mira carried that fire between them. They did not shout about escape, but they whispered. They whispered in the work halls where the sound of machines covered their voices. They whispered in the feeding chambers where guards rarely looked too closely. Every word was careful. Every plan spoken like a secret prayer. Mira had a way with the others. She was not as young as Tom, but her voice held weight. People trusted her because she had survived here longer than most. When she spoke of Tom's watchful eyes and clever mind, the others began to listen. Some still shook their heads, saying no one could break the overseer's grip. But Mira kept pressing, telling them that waiting for rescue was a dream that would never come. The only path to freedom was the one they made themselves. Tom did not seek to be a leader. He only wanted a chance to breathe free air again. Yet he could not turn away when people looked at him with a mix of fear and hope. Each night, in the dim cells, he explained what he had seen. He spoke of the flicker in the shield when the power grid shook. He spoke of the cameras that turned away for 3 seconds during guard changes. He spoke of the drones that could be blinded if their sensors were covered in oil. The humans began to prepare. A man named Aaron stole small pieces of wire from the machines he worked on. A quiet woman named Lena hid scraps of food under loose floor plates. Others sharpened broken rods into makeshift weapons. Each act was small, but together they formed the bones of a plan. For the first time in many cycles, there was movement in the prison that the overseers did not control. It was not loud enough to draw attention, but it was steady. Even the weakest captives, those who had nearly given up, began to walk with a little more strength in their steps. They spoke less of despair and more of survival. Still, fear never left them. The overseers had weapons that could cut down dozens in seconds. Their beasts, half machine and half flesh, were trained to tear through crowds without mercy. Every captive knew what happened when rebellion was crushed. They had seen bodies carried away. They had heard the screams that echoed through the halls. When someone dared to stand against their masters, one night, while the station lights dimmed to their lowest, Mira gathered a small group in the corner of their hall. Tom stood beside her, his face pale but firm. Mira's voice was low yet steady as she explained the plan. They would not move yet. First, they would test the weakness. Aaron would tamper with the power lines near the shield. If the shield flickered again, they would know the chance was real. Some argued that it was madness. Others feared that the overseers would sense even the smallest change. But Tom reminded them that doing nothing was also death. They would die slowly in this prison, piece by piece, unless they risked everything for freedom. His words struck like sparks against dry wood. The group fell silent. And in that silence, courage began to grow. The following work shift, Aaron moved carefully near the power lines. His hands trembled as he loosened a panel and crossed 2 wires with a thin piece of metal. Sparks jumped, and for a moment the shield at the far end of the hall flickered. It was brief, almost too brief to notice, but Tom's eyes caught it. His heart pounded with both fear and joy. The weakness was real. That night, Tom and Mira shared the news with the others. The hall buzzed with whispers as hope spread like fire. Some clenched their fists, already dreaming of the escape. Others stared at the floor, frightened of what would come. But no one denied the truth. The overseers were not perfect. Their prison was strong, but not unbreakable. The days that followed were filled with hidden work. Lena stored more food, wrapping it in cloth to hide the smell. Aaron built crude tools from wires and scraps. Mira taught the group how to move quietly and stay in step. Tom studied the guards more closely than ever. counting the seconds of their patrols until he could recite them in his sleep. The overseers noticed nothing. Their eyes were fixed on their routines, their pride blinding them to the small sparks of rebellion forming under their noses. The captives looked the same as they always had. They marched when ordered, worked when told, and returned to their cells without protest. Yet beneath that mask, a storm was building. One evening, as Tom looked through the narrow window at the stars, Mira joined him. She asked if he was afraid. Tom did not lie. He said fear was heavy on him every moment, but he would rather face it while fighting for freedom than let it crush him in silence. Mira placed a hand on his arm and told him he was not alone. None of them were alone anymore. The prison of steel still stood, tall and unbroken. But deep inside its walls, sparks were glowing brighter. The humans had not yet moved, but the overseers. Control was no longer complete. A rebellion was growing, and soon it would burst into flame. The overseer station moved silently through space, glowing like a dark jewel against the stars. Inside, the humans waited for the moment they had prepared for. Days of secret planning had led to this night. Tom knew they could not delay any longer. If they waited, fear would eat their courage, or worse. The overseers would notice something was wrong. The guards had just finished their evening patrol. The sound of heavy boots faded down the metal halls. The lights dimmed to the usual night cycle, leaving only the soft red glow of security beams. Tom looked at Mira. She gave him a single nod. It was time. Tom rose from his corner and moved toward the energy shield at the end of their hall. Aaron was ready, holding a broken piece of wire wrapped in cloth, with shaking hands. Aaron forced the wire into the small control panel near the wall. Sparks leapt, and the shield flickered. For one breath it held, then it shuddered and died. The air felt different at once, open and alive. The captives gasped, some froze, afraid to step forward. But Tom moved first. He pushed through the gap, where the glowing wall had been, and stood in the open corridor. His heart pounded so loud he thought it would give him away. He looked back at Mira. She urged the others forward. Slowly, they followed, one by one, leaving their prison cells behind. They did not get far before the overseers noticed. A shrill alarm cut through the halls, turning the dim lights into flashing red. The humans flinched, some covering their ears. Tom clenched his fists. He had expected this. There was no escape without noise, no freedom without risk. Run, Tom said firmly, his voice stronger than he felt. The group broke into a desperate sprint, their bare feet slapping against the steel floor. Mira stayed close to Tom, helping guide the slower ones. Aaron clutched his wire like a weapon, though he knew it was almost useless now. The sound of boots returned, louder this time. Overseer guards rushed toward them, tall figures covered in dark armor. Their glowing visors swept the corridor like searching eyes. Drones floated overhead, firing red beams that lit the walls. The captives screamed and scattered. Tom grabbed a loose pipe from the ground and swung it at the nearest drone. Sparks flew as the machine crashed into the wall. Mira struck another with a broken rod she had hidden in her clothes. The smell of burning circuits filled the air. The group pushed forward, but more guards poured into the corridor. The overseers shouted in their strange metallic language. Their weapons blazed, sending bolts of energy across the hall. A blast struck the wall near Tom, leaving a smoking scar. He felt heat on his skin and fear in his chest, yet he did not stop. He lifted the pipe again and charged. A guard tried to block his way, raising a heavy weapon. Tom swung the pipe with all his strength. The strike hit the guard's arm, making the weapon fall. Mira kicked it aside before the guard could recover. The humans surged forward, using fists, pipes, and rods against armored soldiers. It was not skill that carried them, but desperation and the will to live. The corridor became chaos, shouts, alarms, and the crash of metal filled every corner. Some captives stumbled, but others pulled them back to their feet. They were no longer just frightened prisoners. They were beginning to act as one. Tom spotted a maintenance tunnel ahead. He shouted for the others to follow. Aaron rushed to the panel and struck it with his wire. The cover fell, exposing the narrow passage. One by one, the humans crawled inside, their bodies pressing together in the tight space. Mira stayed at the entrance, helping the last few through. The overseers closed in. One raised a glowing blade, ready to strike at Mira. Tom leapt forward, slamming the pipe into the guard's chest. The blade cut the air just inches from Mira's face. Together, they pulled into the tunnel, sealing the panel behind them. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by the small lights on the walls. Breathing hard, the captives crawled deeper into the tunnel. The air smelled of oil and dust, but it was freedom compared to the cells they had left. Their bodies shook with both fear and triumph. They had broken out. The overseers knew where they were, but they were no longer in cages. Mira whispered encouragement. To those who sobbed in fear, she told them to be strong, that the hardest part was still ahead. Tom stayed silent, his mind racing. He knew the overseers would not stop until they were all crushed. The alarm was a signal to the entire station. Every guard, every drone, every beast would now be hunting them. But even in the dark, Tom's heart burned with determination. They had taken the first step. They had proved that the overseers could be resisted. For the first time in years, he felt the taste of freedom on his tongue. He swore to himself that he would not let it slip away. Behind them, the sound of metal echoed as overseers searched the halls. Ahead, the tunnel stretched deeper into the unknown. The humans crawled forward, carrying with them both fear and hope. The first break had been made, and the prison of steel would never be the same again. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and hot. The humans crawled in silence, their breath loud in the tight space. The faint light strips on the walls flickered, throwing shadows across their faces. Each movement forward felt like a victory, yet fear hung heavy in the air. They all knew the overseers would not rest until the escape was stopped. Tom led the group, his hands scraping against the cold steel floor. Mira followed close behind, making sure no one was left behind. Aaron carried his broken wire like it was still a weapon, though sweat dripped from his brow. Lena whispered prayers under her breath, clutching the scraps of food she had saved. The tunnel opened into a wider passage, filled with the smell of oil and burning circuits. They paused, listening. The distant sound of heavy boots and clashing metal rang through the walls. The overseers were close. Suddenly, the tunnel lights snapped to bright red. A shrill alarm blared again, shaking the air. Then, without warning, the wall ahead exploded. Metal shards flew as a squad of overseer guards burst through. Behind them, drones swarmed like angry insects, their red beams flashing across the passage. Panic erupted. Some captives screamed, trying to run back. But Tom raised his voice. Forward, not back. If we stop, we die here. His words cut through the chaos like a blade. He charged with his pipe, striking the first drone out of the air. Sparks lit the tunnel, and smoke stung his eyes. Mira swung her rod, smashing another machine. Aaron thrust his wire into a control panel, causing sparks that blinded the guards for a moment. The humans pushed into the larger corridor, but more overseers closed in. Their weapons fired, scorching the walls with blasts of light. A bolt struck the ground near Lena, throwing her to the floor. Mira pulled her up, shouting for her to keep moving. The corridor was chaos. Fire spread from broken machines, filling the air with smoke. Alarms wailed, and the lights flickered in madness. Tom's heart pounded, but he forced himself forward. He knew that hesitation meant death. One of the guards unleashed a war beast, a hulking creature with metal claws and burning eyes. Its roar shook the corridor as it charged, knocking the captives aside. Fear rippled through the group, but Tom stood his ground. He lifted his pipe and shouted for the others to attack together. The humans swarmed the beast, striking with rods, pipes, and fists. It slashed at them, tearing metal from the walls. But their unity gave them strength. Aaron jammed his wire into one of its glowing eyes, and Mira struck its leg with all her might. With a final push, the group forced the creature into a cluster of sparking cables. Electricity surged through its body, and the beast collapsed in smoke. For a brief moment, silence returned. The humans stood panting, their faces blackened with soot, their hands shaking. They had faced one of the Overseer's monsters and survived. Hope flickered brighter than before. But the Overseers were not finished. Another squad appeared at the far end of the corridor. Weapons ready, Tom's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. He spotted a broken hatch to the left, its frame bent from the blast. Without wasting a second, he pointed. There, through the hatch. The group rushed toward it as bolts of energy rained down. Mira covered the rear, swinging her rod at any guard who came too close. Aaron and two others forced the hatch open. Wider, and the captives poured through into another maintenance shaft inside. The air was thick with dust, but it was safety for now. The sounds of battle faded behind them. Tom leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. He looked at the others. Their faces were tired, their bodies bruised, but their eyes burned with determination. Mira wiped sweat from her brow and said, "We cannot stop. They will chase us until the end." Tom nodded. "Then we give them fire to chase. We show them. We will not bow again." The humans gathered themselves, sharing what little water and food they had. Lena handed out pieces of bread, her hand steadied despite the chaos. Aaron checked the scraps of wire he still carried, determined to make use of them. As they moved deeper into the shaft, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the station. The Overseers were unleashing their fury, locking down sectors, sending more troops. The prison was becoming a battlefield. The humans no longer walked like broken captives. They walked like survivors. Every step forward was a challenge to the Overseer's power. Every strike against a guard or a drone was a promise that they would not be slaves forever. The fire in the halls was not only from the blasts and smoke, it was in their hearts. It was the fire of rebellion, burning brighter. With each moment, the station groaned as alarms echoed across every hall. Red lights flashed in sharp rhythm, turning shadows into restless shapes. The Overseers were closing in from all sides. But the humans pressed forward. They were bruised, hungry, and frightened. Yet something new burned inside them. They were no longer captives crawling through tunnels. They were becoming a force. Tom led at the front, his pipe clutched tightly in his hands. Mira stayed near the middle, guiding the weaker ones and calming those who shook with fear. Aaron scouted ahead, checking every corner for traps or drones. Lena carried the food, her arms aching, yet her steps steady. Each person had taken a role, not by order, but by choice, for the first time since their capture. They were moving like a group with purpose. The maintenance shaft opened into a wide chamber filled with pipes, broken panels, and thick smoke. The humans hurried inside, but before they could rest, a deep growl shook the floor. From the far corner, two Overseer war beasts appeared. Their bodies glowed with red lines of energy, and their claws clanged against the steel floor. Behind them, armored guards advanced with weapons raised. Fear rippled through the humans. Some stepped back, pressing against the wall. The beasts were larger than any human, and their eyes burned with machine fire. A single beast could crush them, and here were two. For a moment, it seemed the rebellion would end in this chamber. But Tom stood firm. His voice rose above the growls and alarms. Together, we fight together. Alone we fall, but united we live. His words struck something deep in the captives. Mira lifted her rod and shouted, "With him, stand with him." The group surged with sudden courage. Aaron grabbed a length of pipe and waved it toward the beast. Lena, though shaking, held a sharp piece of metal like a knife. Even the weakest among them clenched their fists, refusing to bow. The first beast charged, claws tearing through the floor. Tom dodged and swung his pipe at its leg. The strike made the creature stumble, sparks flying from its joints. Mira leapt forward, slamming her rod against its other leg. The beast roared, lashing out. But the humans swarmed it from all sides. Aaron climbed onto its back, jamming his wire into a crack near its neck. Electricity burst, and the beast shuddered violently. The second beast lunged at the group, its claws ready to crush. Lena shouted in terror, but another captive, a man named Darren, grabbed a fallen pipe and swung with all his might. The strike gave Lena time to move aside. The humans circled the beast, striking at its legs and arms. Sparks flew as they battered it again and again. At Tom's command, the captives pushed a large pipe loose from the ceiling. It crashed down onto the beast, pinning it for a moment. The others leapt at the chance, striking it with everything they had. The chamber filled with smoke and the sound of metal tearing apart. Finally, with one last cry, the beast collapsed, its red glow fading to black. Silence fell for a heartbeat. The humans stood panting, covered in sweat and dust. They looked at the wreckage of the beast and then at one another. No longer did their eyes show only fear. They showed pride, strength, and unity. But the fight was not over. The overseer guards advanced, weapons blazing. Energy bolts struck the walls, filling the chamber with fire. Tom raised his pipe again, shouting, "Hold the line." The humans formed a rough wall, side by side. Pipes, rods, and broken tools rose like weapons of war. The overseers fired, but the humans pressed forward, forcing them back with sheer numbers and fury. Aaron swung his pipe so hard it bent against an armored chest. Mira struck a guard's helmet, knocking him to the ground. Even Lena threw her sharp metal at a drone, bringing it crashing down. For every human that fell, another stepped up. Their unity gave them strength the overseers did not expect. The guards, trained to crush scattered captives, struggled against a crowd that fought. As one, the chamber became a storm of fire, smoke, and cries of defiance. At last, the overseers pulled back. The surviving guards retreated through a side corridor, dragging their wounded with them. The chamber was littered with broken machines and the bodies of fallen beasts. The humans stood victorious, though their bodies shook from exhaustion. Tom lowered his pipe, his arms trembling. Mira touched his shoulder, her eyes filled with pride. "We did not run. We stood." Aaron grinned through blood on his lip. "They thought us weak. Now they know we can fight." The humans gathered together, breathing hard but standing tall. In that moment, they were no longer a group of broken captives. They were an army, forged in chaos, bound by unity. Tom looked at each face, burned and bruised but alive. He knew the overseers would not stop. More troops, more beasts, more weapons would come. But he also knew something had changed forever. The humans had tasted strength. They had seen what unity could do. With fire still burning in the halls around them, Tom spoke words that carried through the smoke. "We are not slaves. We are free people. And we will not be broken again." The group answered with a cheer that shook the chamber louder than the alarms. Their rebellion was no longer just survival. It was war. The chamber still smelled of smoke and burnt metal when Tom raised his head and looked at the path ahead. They had defeated beasts and guards, but he knew more enemies were waiting. Beyond these halls was the hangar bay, and in the hangar waited ships that could carry them away from the overseer's grip. Reaching it was their only hope. Mira walked beside him, her steps heavy but firm. Her rod was bent from battle, yet she carried it like it was a sword. Aaron moved at the front with two others, checking each corner before the group advanced. Lena stayed at the center, holding the small bundle of food that had kept them alive. Everyone carried something, even if it was only courage. The humans moved through the dim passages, guided by Tom's memory of the station's layout. He had studied the paths during long nights in the cells. He remembered the rhythm of guard patrols, the way the halls connected, the signs marked on the walls. Now those memories were their map. The alarms still rang across the station, though fainter now. The overseers were reorganizing, gathering their forces for one final strike. Tom knew they would defend the hangar at all costs. If the humans reached the ships, the overseers' control would crack. They entered a long corridor that led toward the upper levels. The floor was slick with oil, and sparks dropped from the ceiling. Suddenly, the ground shook as explosions echoed. Nearby, the overseers were sealing passages, trying to trap them. "Faster," Tom urged, his voice carrying strength despite his exhaustion. "We cannot give them time to close the way." The group hurried, though their bodies ached. Mira helped a limping man, refusing to leave anyone behind. Aaron broke open a locked door with a pipe, leading them through an alternate path. Every action mattered. And every person gave what they could. At last, the corridor opened into a massive hall. The humans froze. Ahead of them, the overseers had formed a blockade. Dozens of armored guards stood in formation, weapons glowing in the dark. Behind them were two more war beasts, larger than the ones before. Their claws scraped against the floor, and their eyes burned like coals. For a moment, silence filled the hall. The humans felt the weight of fear pressing on their hearts. The enemy was too strong. Too many. But then Tom stepped forward, lifting his pipe high. They think we will kneel. Show them we will not. Mira raised her rod. For every life they took, we strike back. The humans roared together, their voices echoing against the steel walls. With that cry, they charged. The battle erupted with blinding fury. Energy blasts lit the hall, striking the walls and floor. Humans leapt aside, dodging fire while rushing forward with pipes and rods. The war beasts roared, swinging their massive claws, but the humans did not scatter. They swarmed the beasts in groups. Striking together, Tom led one group against the first beast. He swung his pipe at its leg, while Aaron jabbed his wire into the glowing joints. The beast fought fiercely, slashing and snapping, but unity gave the humans strength. They climbed its back, striking at weak points until sparks flew. With one final push, they forced the beast into a power conduit. The explosion of light and sound shook the hall as the beast collapsed. Mira led the fight against the second beast. She shouted orders, guiding the others to strike at its sides. Lena, though trembling, threw her sharp piece of metal into its eye, blinding it. The humans pressed their attack until the beast stumbled, with ropes torn from machinery. They bound its limbs and dragged it down. The second beast fell with a crash that shook the floor. The overseer guards pressed forward, firing without mercy. But the humans had gained too much courage to fall back. They fought with everything they had, turning broken tools into weapons and fire into cover. The hall became a storm of smoke, sparks, and battle cries. At last, the overseers faltered. Their formation broke as the humans surged. Some guards retreated. Others fell under the blows of desperate hands. The humans pushed through the line, forcing open the heavy doors at the far end of the hall. Beyond the doors stretched the hangar bay. The sight made the humans stop in awe. Rows of alien ships rested under glowing lights, their sleek shapes promised freedom, escape, and a sky without chains. But the overseers were not done. A final squad stood guarding the nearest ships. Their weapons gleamed, and their voices rang with metallic orders. This was the last barrier between the captives and freedom. Tom wiped sweat from his brow, his chest heaving. He looked at Mira, who stood ready despite a bleeding wound on her arm. Aaron gripped his bent wire. Lena tightened her hold on the food bundle, refusing to let go. Every face showed fear, but also fire. Tom raised his pipe once more. One last fight. After this, the sky is ours. The humans lifted their weapons and let out a roar that shook the hangar. They charged forward into the final battle, hearts burning with the dream of freedom. The hangar shook with the sound of weapons and battle cries. Humans and overseers clashed under the bright lights, their shadows stretching across the steel floor for the captives. This was the final wall standing between them and freedom. They had fought too hard to turn back now. Tom swung his pipe against the guard's helmet, sparks flying as the blow knocked the enemy to the ground. Mira, her wounded arm wrapped in cloth, struck with her rod, holding the line against another armored soldier. Aaron ducked under a blast of energy, rolling forward to jam his bent wire into a guard's leg joint. Lena, though shaking, hurled scraps of broken metal at drones circling overhead, bringing one crashing down. Every human gave everything they had. Fear no longer guided them. They were fueled by the fire of survival, the dream of breathing free air again. The overseers fought with ruthless strength, but they had not expected such resistance. The humans moved as one, covering each other, striking together. When one stumbled, another pulled them up. When one cried in fear, another gave them courage. The battle raged across the hangar until Tom spotted their chance. Near the far end rested a small transport craft, its hatch glowing faintly. It was not the largest ship, but it was enough to carry them all. "There," Tom shouted, pointing. "That ship is ours." The group surged toward the craft, fighting their way through. The remaining overseers, guards tried to block the path, but the humans pressed forward with every ounce of strength left in their bodies. Mira struck down a guard who raised his blade against Lena. Aaron smashed his pipe against the control panel, causing lights to flicker and confusing the drones. Finally, they reached the ship. Tom slammed his pipe against the hatch until it broke. Open, the humans rushed inside, stumbling onto the cold floor of the transport bay. The interior was strange and filled with glowing panels, but to them it looked like salvation. "Get everyone aboard," Tom ordered, his chest heaving. Mira guided the weak and wounded. Making sure no one was left behind, Lena dropped the bundle of food inside, and Aaron began searching the controls. But the overseers were not finished. More soldiers stormed into the hangar, their weapons blazing. Bolts of energy struck the ship's outer hull, shaking it violently. Tom ran to the pilot's chair, staring at the strange symbols on the panels. He had never flown a ship before, but he remembered watching the overseers during transport. He pressed buttons, pulled levers, and the ship roared to life. Lights flared, and the engines began to hum. "Hold them back," Tom shouted. "I will." "Get us out." Mira stood at the hatch, swinging her rod at any overseer who came too close. Aaron hurled broken tools at drones, while others used pipes to push back soldiers trying to force their way inside. The humans fought with desperate courage, knowing that every second gave Tom time to learn the controls. Tom gripped the handles tightly. He pressed another switch, and the ship rose slightly off the ground. The floor shook under the power of the engines. The overseers shouted in alarm, firing more blasts at the ship. Sparks flew as the hull shook, but the humans inside held firm. "Now," Tom whispered to himself. He pulled the main lever forward. With a thunderous roar, the transport lifted into the air. The sudden force threw everyone inside against the walls. Mira grabbed a railing, holding on as the ship lurched upward. The overseers scrambled below, firing wildly as the ship rose higher. But the humans cheered, their voices filling the cabin. For the first time, the prison walls were below them, shrinking as the transport climbed toward the hangar doors. Then the overseers unleashed their final weapon. Massive turrets rose from the floor, firing streams of energy at the rising ship. The blast rocked the craft, alarms flashing across the panels. Tom clenched his teeth, gripping the controls with all his strength. "Hold together," he muttered, guiding the ship upward in a desperate climb. He weaved left and right, dodging blasts that lit the hangar like lightning. Mira shouted encouragement to the others, telling them to trust in Tom. Aaron kept his eyes on the panels, calling out when the engines overheated. Lena clutched her food bundle, whispering hope through trembling lips. With one final burst, the ship shot through the hangar doors. Light flooded the cabin as the transport broke free into the endless black of space. Stars stretched across the void, brighter and clearer than the captives had ever seen. The overseer ships gave chase, engines blazing as they poured out of the station. Tom gritted his teeth, pushing the transport to its limit. The vessel shook, but he refused to slow. He guided it through debris fields and past burning wreckage, each turn risking their lives but keeping them ahead of the enemy dot at last. After what felt like hours, the overseer ships began to fall behind. The transport roared into open space, leaving the station far behind. Silence filled the cabin except for the hum of the engines. The humans sat in awe, staring through the windows at the stars. Tears filled their eyes, not of sorrow, but of joy. For the first time in years, they were free. Mira leaned against Tom's chair, her voice soft but strong. "You did it. We all did it." Tom looked at her, then at the others. Their faces were tired, bruised, but alive. He felt pride swell in his chest. "This is only the beginning. We are free now, and we will never be chained again." The humans cheered, their voices rising together in the vastness of space. The overseers had tried to break them, but they had risen through chaos, fire, and blood. They had made their great escape. The stars stretched before them, endless and open, their journey was not over, but their chains were gone. Humanity had found its strength once more, and no prison could hold them again.